Welcome to the Big Sky. I'm Anthony Crescenzo. Some exciting news in Big Sky. North Dakota finally got a win, beating Northern Colorado 48-38. Other winners include Montana State, the Grizzlies, and Southern Utah. Eastern Washington scraped by UC Davis 41-38. The Lumberjacks chopped down Illinois State 37-16. And congratulations to Case Cookus for being named FCS Stats Offensive Player of the Week, going 26 for 45, 380 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, and even caught a pass for a touchdown. Northern Arizona upset the number 7 team in the country. In conference standings, the Eagles, Wildcats, and Lumberjacks are all at the top, staying undefeated in the conference, followed by the Grizzlies and Bobcats, with 1 loss each. 3 of those teams are now nationally ranked. FCS Stats has Eastern at number 10, Weber at 18, and now the Grizz at 24. For this week's matchups, the Fighting Hawks are at Montana, the Lumberjacks at Portland State, Thunderbirds at Weber State, the Bengals at Sacramento State, and for the game of the week, Montana State at number 10, Eastern Washington. The Bobcats are going to the Inferno. The Cats are coming off another win and are going up against one of the best quarterbacks in FCS, in Gage Goodbrid. Goodbrid has been passing for over 300 yards all season long. Against UC Davis, he had 452 passing yards, 6 touchdowns. He's also extremely mobile. Montana State's Chris Murray isn't sitting around either. He had 126 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns against Portland State. It's going to be a fun game to watch. For the SCS Conference Whiparound, I'm Anthony Crescenzo.
It was a good week in the Big South as the 5 schools in action combined to go 4-1 in the final week before conference play begins. But before we get into Week 7, here's a look back at Week 6. The 1 loss came from the 2-time defending champion Charleston Southern Buccaneers. The Bucs fell on the road at Indiana of the FBS 27-0. They rushed for 134 yards on the ground, but didn't complete a pass in the loss. The Gardner-Webb running Bulldogs picked up win number 1 with a 42-14 blowout over Division II Shorter University. In the win, dual-threat quarterback Tyrell Maxwell completed 8 of 14 for 144 yards and 2 scores, and added 139 yards on 8 carries with 2 more scores. The Presbyterian Blue Hose picked up a big win by defeating St. Francis at home, 26-14 for their 3rd W in 4 contests. Freshman back Torrance Marble iced the win with a 12-yard run to put Presbyterian up by 2 scores. He earned Rookie of the Week honors with 21 carries for 84 yards and 1 touchdown. Kennesaw State picked up their 4th straight win with a 48-3 dismantling of Texas Southern. It was a dominating performance from the Owls' defense as they allowed just 44 rushing yards on 29 carries and picked off 2 passes, improving their conference lead in takeaways. The Monmouth Hawks picked up their 3rd straight road win with a 48-36 victory over Holy Cross. The win runs Monmouth's record to a Big South best 5-1 as they head into their bye week. A few Hawks had big statistical days in the win. Quarterback Kenji Bahar earned Conference Player of the Week, throwing for a career-high 324 yards on 23 of 31 and 3 touchdowns. Reggie White Jr. caught 9 passes from Bahar for 137 yards and 2 scores, while Mike Jolly rushed for 119 yards on 6 carries. Senior safety Mike Bazile had a career-high 19 stops, a Big South record 17 solo tackles, 4 tackles for a loss, 2 sacks, and a forced fumble, earning Conference Defensive Player of the Week. Before we head into Week 7, let's take a look at the Big South standings. Monmouth leads the way with a 5-1 overall record as Kennesaw State is right on their heels at 4-1. Presbyterian comes in at 3-3 while Charleston Southern sits at 2-3. Gardner-Webb is 1-4 and Liberty is in the cellar of the Big South at 3-2. as they're ineligible for the conference championship and the FCS playoffs since they're transitioning to the FBS. Gardner-Webb travels on the road to face number 25 ranked North Carolina Central on Saturday. This is the 5th meeting between the two schools, with the series tied at 2 wins each. This is also the Runnin' Bulldogs' 3rd contest against a Stats FCS ranked opponent this year. The key to pulling off the upset is good play from quarterback Tyrell Maxwell. He can break the Big South record for rushing touchdowns by a quarterback with 2 scores. Look for this game to be played mainly on the ground, as both teams come in ranked in the bottom 5 in pass offense. The Charleston Southern Buccaneers and Presbyterian Blue Hose kick off conference play at Bailey Memorial Stadium on Saturday. The Blue Hose lead the all-time series 14-10, but the Bucs have won the last 2 meetings. Charleston Southern also comes in winners of 13 of their last 14 Big South games. Both teams have very scary rushing attacks, but the key to victory is going to be quarterback play, and I give the edge in that category to Ben Cheek and the Blue Hose. Cheek has been great through the air recently, and this week should be no different. I like Presbyterian to start the conference season off at 1-0. Kennesaw State travels on the road to face Liberty in the Big South's other matchup this Saturday. This is the 3rd meeting between the two schools, with the Flames winning the previous 2. Liberty likely used their bye week to relocate their once dominant offense, which is up for a tough test against an Owl defense that's coming off their best performance of 2017. Both teams come into Week 7 averaging over 30 points per game, but the key matchup is Liberty QB Stephen Calvert against the Kennesaw defense. Calvert has thrown 3 picks in his last 2 games, and the Owls lead the conference with 15 total takeaways, including 11 interceptions and a +8 turnover margin. They have also picked off at least 2 passes in 4 straight games. I like the Owls to improve their lead in takeaways and pick up conference win number 1. That's all for Week 7 in the Big South. Come back next week for all the results and more. For the FCS Conference Whiparound, I'm Frank LaSalle.
In Week 6 of the college football season, the Colonial Athletic Association only had 4 games. 3 out of those 4 games went down to the wire, setting up some phenomenal games for this weekend. Taking a look at the standings, it seemed improbable coming into the season, but 16th ranked Elon sits alone at the top of the conference with a 3-0 record. Coming in right behind them are top-ranked James Madison and 12th ranked New Hampshire at 2-0. Stony Brook is just behind them with a 3-1 record. 11th ranked Villanova is 2-1. Both Delaware and 13th ranked Richmond are 1-1. Albany is right behind them at 1-2. At the bottom, Towson, William & Mary, Rhode Island, and Maine are all winless. The CAA leads every conference with 5 nationally ranked teams according to Stats FCS. We're going to start it off with Delaware, who was able to overcome a 13-point deficit at the half to beat Stony Brook 24-20. Wide receiver Ray Bolden helped lead the way for the Seawolves offense to jump out to a 20-7 lead, hauling in 8 passes for 136 yards and 2 touchdowns. While the run game certainly helped the Blue Hens, rushing for over 200 yards as a team, the defense was the main reason for the comeback, as Malcolm Butler returned a fumble to the house to seal the deal for UDEL. The Blue Hens will look to take that second half momentum into next week as they take on William & Mary, who had a tough loss to Elon. Stony Brook will have to put this one behind them quickly because they have another tough task next week against New Hampshire coming off a bye. Number 16 Elon made it 5 in a row against the Tribe, winning 25-17. Running back Malcolm Summers helped the Phoenix get out to that 23-7 first half lead, rushing for 81 yards and 2 scores in this game. Running back Nate Evans helped William & Mary storm back, rushing for 77 total yards and a touchdown. After having their lead cut to just 6, Elon's Warren Messer was able to force a safety and help the Phoenix close the door. Elon gets a well-deserved bye before coming back against Rhode Island in 2 weeks. The Tribe will look to turn that second half momentum into a win next week as they take on Delaware. In what was another fun matchup, the 13th ranked Richmond Spiders knocked Albany out of the top 25 with a 41-38 double overtime thriller. Both quarterbacks were stars in this game. Albany's Will Brunson threw for 339 yards and 4 scores, while Richmond's Kyle Lauletta threw for 353 yards and 3 touchdowns and became the Spiders' all-time leader in that category. Albany took a 10-point lead on a scoring drive that ended with Gerard Diggs in the end zone. Dejon Brissett caught a touchdown pass to tie it with just over a minute left to send it to overtime. After both teams scored, Albany had their field goal blocked. Griffin Trow was able to convert his 34-yard field goal to break the hearts of the Great Danes. Richmond will look to carry that momentum into next week as they take on Towson coming off a bye week. Albany will have some time to think about that tough loss as they go into their bye. They'll take on Maine the following week. In our final CAA game, the 11th-ranked Wildcats bludgeoned Maine 31-0. The Wildcat defense absolutely dominated, holding Maine to just 227 yards in their second shutout of the season. The defense also was able to force 6 turnovers, which included a 99-yard fumble return by freshman Jaquan Amos, tying an FCS record. Maine will look to get the offense going again next week against Rhode Island. In what will be one of the best games of the season, Villanova heads to Harrisonburg, Virginia to take on the top-ranked James Madison Dukes coming off of a bye in the Stats Game of the Week. College Game Day will be in attendance, which shows you the magnitude of this game. It'll be the best offense in the conference versus the best defense in the conference. Something's got to give. I know I'll be tuned in at 3:30 on Saturday. With your FCS Whiparound, I'm Ryan Griffith. Good luck to all the CAA teams this weekend.
I'm a big fan of the tradition-rich programs in the SoCon. This year, things are shaping up once again to be an exciting photo finish as 7 of the 9 teams are at 500 or better. Now, looking at the standings, Wofford stands alone atop the SoCon after a thrilling overtime victory last week against Western Carolina. That loss puts the Catamounts in a 3-way tie for second place. VMI is the lone winless team in conference and overall, as they are still in search of their first victory on the season. This week in the SoCon, as we look at the schedule, there are 2 huge matchups between Wofford and the Citadel and the surprising East Tennessee State Bucks as they travel to E.J. Whitmer Stadium to face the Catamounts. Mercer looks to avoid the upset as they play host to the Chattanooga Mocs, as does the upstart Furman Paladins as they host the Keydets.
We start with a matchup of 2 teams at the top of the OVC, as Jacksonville State traveled to Clarksville on Saturday to take on Austin Peay State University, winners of 3 straight games. But it was the Gamecock streak of 27 straight OVC victories that would live on this day as they topped the Governors 34-14. It's now 11 straight wins for Jacksonville State over Austin Peay as they asserted their dominance right from the opening kickoff, taking their first drive 91 yards on 17 plays in nearly 8 minutes for a touchdown. The second drive had the same result, only in a different fashion, as they went 49 yards in 3 plays to take a 14-0 lead and route to the victory. Jacksonville State amassed 392 yards of total offense against an APSU defense that had been allowing just 252 yards per game this season. Rock Thomas carried the ball 18 times for 135 yards and 2 touchdowns, while quarterback Bryant Horn threw for 1 and ran 1 in for the Gamecocks. For the Governors, the 2-headed quarterback tandem of Javon Cray and Jeremiah Oatsville combined for 128 yards and 2 touchdowns on 11 completions. But the run game was not its usual self, as Kentel Williams ran for only 54 yards on 11 carries, and the QBs only rushed for 53 yards combined. Austin Peay has another tough game next week as it travels to Nashville to take on Tennessee State, while Jacksonville State entertains Eastern Kentucky at home next week. Fresh off a tough game at Louisville, Murray State was looking to get back into the win column against UT Martin, a team it had lost to 6 straight times. But they would halt that streak this past Saturday in Martin, Tennessee, as a last-second field goal from Gabriel Vincente gave the Racers a 13-10 victory over the Skyhawks. For the first time in years, this game was a defensive battle, as the past 6 times, UT Martin has averaged over 50 points per game. But this time, the Racers limited them to no offensive touchdowns and only 1 field goal. UT Martin had chances, though, including the opportunity to go up 10 points with 6 minutes left in the game, thanks to Khalid Hagans, who returned a punt 67 yards to give the Skyhawks the lead, then intercepted Schuler Bentley to set UT Martin up in Racer territory. But a missed 33-yard field goal gave Murray State life, and on the ensuing drive, the Racers went 80 yards to tie the score, then won it off of a fumble recovery by Lamont Crittenden, and a 4-minute, 27-second drive that drained all the time off the clock, allowing Vincente to win it at the buzzer. UT Martin takes next week off before going to Eastern Kentucky in 2 weeks, while Murray State looks to keep the momentum going at home next week against Eastern Illinois. Now, the Panthers barely got by Tennessee Tech this Saturday, squeaking out a 24-23 victory in Charleston, thanks to a couple fourth quarter defensive stands. Before that, though, third-string quarterback Bud Martin found Alexander Hollins 3 times for touchdowns, including one that put the Panthers up 24-20 with just over 10 minutes left in the game. Now overall, Hollins had 5 catches for 125 yards and those 3 touchdowns, making him my OVC Offensive Player of the Week. Martin wasn't too shabby either, taking over for Scotty Gilkey Jr. and going 10 of 14 for 204 yards and those 3 touchdowns. But the defense stood tall late as Andre Sale tried to bring the Golden Eagles back, driving into EIU territory twice in the last 2 minutes of the game. But an interception and a missed 48-yard field goal allowed Eastern Illinois to walk away victorious and remain one of 2 OVC teams undefeated in conference play. Tennessee Tech, still looking for its first victory of the season, gets Southeast Missouri next week. Tennessee State found itself trailing Eastern Kentucky early in the fourth quarter, but a 13-play, 88-yard drive for a touchdown put the Tigers ahead 24-21, and the defense took it from there, getting 3 interception return for touchdowns to ice the game and give TSU the victory 45-21. Ryan Markish continued stellar play for EKU, hauling in 5 catches for 72 yards and 2 touchdowns from Tim Boyle, who also ran in a score. Vincent Sellers, a freshman, also caught 2 touchdowns from Tim Boyle on Saturday. Unfortunately for Tim and the rest of Eastern Kentucky, Sellers plays for Tennessee State. Sellers returned interceptions 34 and 44 yards for touchdowns, icing the game and earning himself my OVC Defensive Player of the Week award. Tennessee State has a big game in the Sergeant York Trophy Series next week as it takes on Austin Peay, while EKU travels to Alabama looking to end Jacksonville State's OVC win streak at 27. A quick look at the standings show Eastern Illinois and Jacksonville State as the only undefeated teams in the Ohio Valley, while Austin Peay sits alone in third at 2-1, followed by Murray State and Southeast Missouri. 3 teams sit at 1-2 before Tennessee Tech, who's still looking for their first conference victory. For the FCS Conference Whiparound, I'm Luke Jackson.
As we head into the second half of the college football season, the cream is starting to rise to the top in the Pioneer League, with 3 teams leading the charge. Last week, Marist was upended by unbeaten Columbia 41-17. Stetson picked up its first W of the season, 17-13 over Brown, and Butler smoked Morehead State 44-6 on the road. Jacksonville quarterback Rylan Wells earned Offensive Player of the Week honors, accounting for 5 touchdowns in the win over Davidson 35-21. Dayton upended Drake 20-10 off 2 interceptions by Tim Simon, and Campbell remained undefeated in conference play, beating Valpo 49-10. The Camels are one of 3 unbeaten teams in the conference, along with San Diego and Jacksonville. Drake and Marist sit just behind with only 1 loss each, while Davidson and Stetson remain winless in conference play. 5 conference matchups will feature in the Pioneer League in Week 7. Jacksonville will travel to the Butler Bowl to take on the Bulldogs. Stetson will host Davidson. Valparaiso will be back at home as they host Marist, and Morehead State will travel to the West Coast to take on San Diego. But this week's top matchup will feature the conference's 2 leading rushers, as Tucker Yinger leads the Dayton Flyers as they host Daniel Smith and the Campbell Camels. For the Pioneer League, I'm David Hassagen.
It's always a wild week in the Mid-Eastern Athletic Conference. One thing we know for sure is that the North Carolina A&T Aggies are the cream of the crop. Head coach Rod Broadway has his Aggies at 6-0 on the season and looking like his strongest team in recent memory. I know that's blasphemous to say, but if we're being real, the Aggies are getting it done on both sides of the ball and on both ends of offense and defense. Let's take a look at the standings, and I've been very impressed with the Hampton Pirates' play this season. Quietly, they're 2-0 in the conference, along with Norfolk State, who are also looking like the fly in the ointment type of a team. Bethune, South Carolina State, Florida A&M, and Howard are still very much in play for the conference title. This week on the schedule, it's homecoming for the Morgan State Bears as they host Savannah State. I'll be the color commentator on that broadcast for the game, and you can watch that one on ESPN3 or the Watch ESPN app. FAMU has a chance to pull a shocker this week as they host the Aggies in another fork-in-the-road type of a game in Daytona Beach as South Carolina State travels to Bethune-Cookman. For more on the MEAC, visit the website www.meacsports.com.
After a wild week that saw South Dakota beat Penguin Nation on a last-second field goal, North Dakota State continued their offensive dominance of the league, and the Redbirds being upset by Northern Arizona. Here are the stats, FCS conference standings. The number 2 Bison, the number 4 Yotes, and number 15 Redbirds are all tied for first at 2-0. Then the number 7 Jackrabbits, number 17 Leathernecks, number 8 Penguin Nation, and the Panthers are tied at 1-1, and in last are the Salukis, Bears, and Sycamores at 0-2. Let's head to South Dakota, where the number 4 Yotes, coming off their victory against Penguin Nation, look to continue their march towards the playoffs as they host Indiana State. Yotes quarterback Chris Streveler has been unstoppable this year as he's put up 13 passing touchdowns and 7 rushing touchdowns so far this season, as their offense is averaging an FCS best 537 yards and 45 points a game, which could spell trouble for a Sycamores defense that is giving up 36 points per game. The Sycamores have to rely on their offense, especially their workhorse running back Lamont Booker, to eat up yards, keep the chains moving, and run down the clock as much as possible to keep the ball out of Streveler's hands if they hope to win. Next, to Western Illinois, where the number 17 Leathernecks, coming off their big road win against Northern Iowa, host Missouri State. Leathernecks quarterback Sean McGuire looks to continue his hot start to the season, as over the last 14 quarters he has a 69.4 completion percentage, 1,187 yards passing, and 12 touchdowns to go along with 1 interception. Heading over to Illinois State, where the number 14 Redbirds look to rebound off their first loss of the season as they travel to Southern Illinois. The Salukis' young defense will be tested this week as they face the Redbirds' two-headed running attack of Robinson and Smith, who were held to only 52 yards last week. If the Salukis can't contain the run, it should set up for the Redbirds quarterback Jake Colby, coming off his 3-interception game, to put up some big passing numbers. Over to South Dakota State, where the number 7 Jackrabbits host Northern Iowa. The Jackrabbits' dangerous offense, led by quarterback Tyron Christian, tight end Dallas Goedert, wide receiver Jake Winicky, and their new threat tight end Skylar Kavanaugh, rebounded last week to put up 49 points. This will be a huge test for the Panthers defense, led by linebacker Jared Farley. Panthers quarterback Eli Dunn has done a great job this year as he's thrown for 14 touchdown passes and has developed great chemistry with his favorite receiver, Darius Fontaine. And finally, in the game of the week, number 2 North Dakota State heads to the Ice Castle to take on number 8 Youngstown State. The Bison have the number 1 scoring offense, averaging 51.6 points per game, while also having the number 1 defense that has allowed only 6.2 points per game. But don't think that scares Penguin Nation head coach Bo Pelini or the team, as they have already this year decimated one of the highest scoring FCS offenses in South Dakota State. Penguin Nation knows that in order to stop the Bison, they will have to get pressure on quarterback Easton Stick and make him scramble and shut down the Bison fierce running attack of Dunn, Anderson, and Brook, which won't be an easy task, but with the speed of their defense, they will have a shot. On defense, the Bison had better be prepared to take on one of the best FCS running attacks they have seen all year. Youngstown State's strength has been the 3-headed monster running attack of McCaster, Turner, and Alessi, and now have a new running threat in quarterback Mays. Linebacker Nick DeLuca, who is the heart and soul of the Bison defense, has to step up and have a monster game to stop the run and get Penguin Nation to start airing it out against this Bison shutdown secondary led by safety James Hendricks, which has 14 interceptions already this season. For the Football Game Plan's FCS Conference Whiparound, I'm Brian Sullivan.
Never a dull moment in the Southland Conference, especially when you're talking about offense. Right now, we're seeing teams like Central Arkansas, McNeese State, Nichols, Sam Houston State, and Southeastern Louisiana really light up the scoreboard. Ultimately, the winner of the Southland will come down to which defense you can trust. As we take a look at the standings, it's no surprise that all of the aforementioned programs are near the top of the list. Keep an eye on both Abilene Christian and Northwestern State, as I think both the Wildcats and Demons are primed for a move up the standings. This week on the schedule, both Abilene Christian and Northwestern State have a chance to make huge statements as they face both Nichols and Sam Houston State respectively. Lamar and Incarnate Word meet up in Gale and Tom Benson Stadium, as both are looking to notch their first win within the conference.
Let's start with the only conference game of the weekend between Wagner and Duquesne. And it was all the Dukes in this one, as they dominated the Seahawks 38-0 on Saturday. Tommy Stewart was the offensive star for Duquesne, going 14 of 23 for 238 yards and 4 touchdowns, 2 of which went to Nahari Crawford, who caught 6 overall for 156 yards and put the game away with a 79-yard catch from Stewart after the Duke defense stopped a 13-play Wagner drive inside their own 20. 2 plays later, Stewart found Crawford and put Duquesne up 28-0. Stewart's play on the day earned him my NEC Offensive Player of the Week award. Ryan Fultz was again the offensive star for Wagner, running 28 times for 118 yards. Fultz and the rest of the Seahawks will continue conference play next week as they host Central Connecticut, while Duquesne will travel to Robert Morris to take on the Colonials. Speaking of the Colonials, they had a tough go of it in Tennessee this past Saturday, falling to East Tennessee State 16-3. East Tennessee's defense came to play on Saturday, allowing Robert Morris only 211 total yards of offense and sacking the quarterback 8 times. Those sacks kept the RMU offense off balance, as did early turnovers, which set up the 10 first-half points for ETSU. Throw in a second-half fumble, which set up yet another ETSU field goal, and 13 points in total were scored off of Colonial turnovers. Gerald Ferguson and Tyler LaMonica did their best on defense to keep Robert Morris in it, combining for 18 total tackles, 6.5 for loss, and 3 sacks. Their combined efforts earned them both a co-NEC Defensive Player of the Week award from me. They'll look to lead the Colonials to a win next week against the Dukes at home. Central Connecticut had the best win outside the conference this past weekend, beating the defending Ivy League co-champions Pennsylvania 42-21. The defense was big early for the Blue Devils, setting up the first TD with an interception and the second with a forced punt, then getting themselves into the scoring fund with a 79-yard interception return for a touchdown by Najee Brown. The offense took it from there, controlling the game on the ground. Cameron Nash carried the ball 23 times for 119 yards and a touchdown, and quarterback Jake Dolagala ran one and threw one into the end zone. CCSU looks to go 2-0 in conference next week in Staten Island against Wagner. And finally, the St. Francis Red Flashes let a blocked field goal and a blocked punt return for a touchdown get them behind in the game to Presbyterian, and couldn't quite come all the way back, losing 26-14 this past Saturday. The defense tried to get the Red Flashes back in it, as Louis Gartner, a Paramus Catholic alum, picked up a fumble and returned it 49 yards for a touchdown. And Sean Orsini had 13 tackles on the day, but Bear Fenimore and the offense couldn't get even with Presbyterian. The Red Flashes look to get back in the win column next week at Bryant. There hasn't been much conference play yet in the NEC, so the standings are pretty bunched up at this point, with 3 teams tied at 1-0 at the top. Next week, though, there are 3 conference games, and the week after, 3 more. So separation should come soon in the Northeast Conference. We'll keep you updated, so be sure to come back here. For the FCS Conference Whiparound, I'm Luke Jackson.
This week in the Ivy League featured a ton of intriguing matchups, some important in-conference games, and an Ivy League team looking to break into the FCS Top 25. We start off with Penn, who traveled to Connecticut to take on Central Connecticut State. Penn lost this game 42-21, but just looking at the final score doesn't tell you the whole story. After going down 14-0 at the end of the first, Penn rallied, putting up 21 points in the second, led by quarterback Nick Robinson, who threw for 3 touchdowns in the quarter. All this led to a 28-21 score at halftime. That's where everything went downhill for Penn, as they would surrender 2 more touchdowns in the second half, including a 79-yard interception return by safety Najee Brown. And failed to score any of their own, Penn travels to New York next week to take on a surging Columbia team. As for Columbia, they got a shot at Pioneer League opponent and in-state rival Marist. This game was more of the same for Columbia, as their quarterback Anders Hill once again turned in a phenomenal performance, throwing for 350 yards and 3 touchdowns, then rushed for 2 more scores as well. All of this led to Columbia steamrolling Marist 41-17. The Lions look to keep it rolling as they come home to take on in-conference rival Penn next week. A tough week for the Brown Bears last week, as they were looking to pick up what seemed to be an easy win against the winless Stetson Hatters. That wasn't the case. Maybe the long trip to Florida is what threw the Bears off, but Stetson picked up their first win of the season 17-13 over Brown. The real reason as to why they lost may have been the 2 interceptions quarterback Thomas Linta threw that set up both of Stetson's touchdowns. The Bears will look to bounce back next week as they go back home to prepare for an in-conference matchup with Princeton. Staying with the Tigers, they welcomed the Georgetown Hoyas into Jersey, looking to start another win streak after having their 6-game win streak snapped last week by Columbia. Princeton, after trailing 10-0 early in the first, came out looking for revenge as they put up 36 first-half points on the Hoyas, including a 38-yard interception return for a touchdown from defensive back C.J. Wall. From there, they never looked back as the Tigers were led by quarterback Chad Knopf as he completed 25 of 29 passes for 313 yards and 4 touchdowns. They will look to build on this win next week as they hit the road to take on Brown next week in Rhode Island. Now, things get a bit interesting as Harvard traveled to Ithaca to take on last-place Ivy League rival Cornell. Harvard was looking to improve on their 1-0 start in conference play, and Cornell was looking to get their first win of the season. Harvard went up big in the second quarter, starting off the game leading 14-0 and looked to be in complete control. The Big Red had other plans as they fought back, getting 2 rushing scores out of their situational backup quarterback Jake Jadis to tie the game at 14 heading into the fourth. With a little under 10 minutes left to play in the game, Cornell's kicker Zach Mays hit a 27-yarder to put the Big Red up 3 in the fourth. For Cornell, this win snaps an 11-year losing streak against Harvard. As for Harvard, they look to bounce back after this tough loss next week as they take on a 2-4 Lafayette Leopards team at home. On to the Cornell side of things, they look to start stringing some wins together as they stay home to take on 2-3 Bucknell team next week. Finally, we get to last week's game of the week in the Ivy League, featuring 2 undefeated conference powerhouses, Dartmouth and Yale. As for most games Dartmouth has played this year, this one came right down to the wire. Yale took an early lead as quarterback Kurt Wallings threw for 3 touchdowns to give the Bulldogs a 21-0 lead midway through the second. But Dartmouth wouldn't go down without a fight as defensive back Isaiah Swan took an interception 47 yards to the house to cut Yale's lead 21-7 late in the first half. In the second half, it was all the Jack Hennigan show as he lit up the Bulldogs' defense for 3 touchdowns. The Big Green's defense held strong as well, only allowing 3 points the entire second half. Trailing 27-21 with 34 seconds left, Hennigan found Drew Hennicutt in the end zone on a 15-yard pass to give Dartmouth their first lead of the game and the win. This win catapulted Dartmouth into the FCS standings as now they have more votes to be ranked than any other unranked team in the FCS. They will look to finally crack the top 25 as they take on a 2-3 Sacred Heart team in the Connecticut next week. As for Yale, they look to bounce back after this crushing loss next week as they take on a 2-4 Holy Cross team at home. Let's take a quick look at the conference standings. Dartmouth is sitting pretty at the top of the standings as they are the only undefeated team still left in the conference other than Columbia. Both teams are 4-0, but Dartmouth has the advantage currently by winning both of their in-conference matchups. The biggest difference from last week is Cornell as they jump from dead last to 4th in the conference. Though they are 1-3, after beating Harvard, they now have the same in-conference record as Yale, catapulting themselves up 4 spots from last week. That concludes the Ivy League portion of Football Game Plan's FCS Whiparound. I'm Ian Gridley, and I'll see you next week.
It's time to take a look at the Southwestern Athletic Conference this week, and we'll start by taking a look at the conference standings. Right now, it looks as if Alcorn and Grambling are steamrolling toward the SWAC title game. The Braves are on a 3-game winning streak, and the Tigers are rolling after picking up their 5th straight win on the year. With that said, I would not count out teams like Alabama A&M and Southern as fly-in-the-ointment type teams, as they could still have a say in the conference race. This week on the schedule, we have a big matchup between Prairie View A&M and Alcorn State in the East versus West Clash. Both Jackson State and Arkansas Pine Bluff face Division II programs this week, and Mississippi Valley State, fresh off of an impressive win against the aforementioned Golden Lions, travel to Alabama A&M. You also look at Alabama State and Texas Southern meeting up in H-Town in a battle of winless teams looking for their first victory of the season. So that's it for the SWAC Whiparound. Be sure to visit www.swac.org for more info, news, notes, and tidbits on the Southwestern Athletic Conference.